Okay, everybody. Wanted to hit this head on, this notion of whether this potential war that looks like we're right on the eve of here with Syria, um, are we going to see this as the church, or is the rapture going to come? Does the war hold off in some sense until the rapture of the church? A lot of people are looking for Rosh Hashanah here in 2013, and I'm recording this on the evening of August 27th, 2013. So, in what, a week and a day, or no, a week and a few days here is the Rosh Hashanah. So I want to take this on because I've done a couple of videos. Buried in the middle of the video, we got into Zephaniah 2, and I pointed out a possible rapture reference that comes before what appears to be Psalm 83, or at least part of the Psalm 83 being described. And then in the Septuagint, we see that the end of Zephaniah 2 ends with the destruction of Damascus. And so here we are, in today's headlines here. CNBC broke this story, but it's been on Debka File and other places. So I think this is being viewed with quite a bit of seriousness. So the United States could hit Syria with 3 days of missile strikes, perhaps beginning Thursday. And the article goes on and talks about, what's the objective of these 3 days of missile strikes? Is it sending a message, or are they trying to, take Bashar al-Assad out of power? You come read the article. I'll link it below. But just about everybody that's been watching the civil war in Syria has been careful to say, well, if Israel gets involved, game changer. Or really, if the U.S. gets involved, it's a game changer, because Bashar al-Assad has already said that if these foreign troops enter on his soil, he's going to strike against Israel. And they repeated that basic notion again today. I think it was the Bashar al-Assad's regime, or it might have been the Iranians, but they said, an attack on Syria will lead to an attack on Israel. And so that rhetoric has been repeated, and now the U.S. has said that they're sure that the chemical weapons that were unleashed in Syria were done by the Bashar al-Assad regime, and that's why it seems to be so certain that the U.S., along with coalition forces, are going to attack inside of Syria. And so what I wanted to do is go back to the Zephaniah passages, give the 2 or 3 views that people put on that, maybe restate why I think it needs to be a pointer to the rapture. And again, there's brighter people than me, you'll see, that I used as sources for and against. It's the only way I can make sense of these passages and the current events. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I'll link this article below, but I'm sure by morning here it'll probably be blasted across a whole bunch of newspapers, so maybe it'll be old news by then. Okay, we're over here in Bible Gateway, Zephaniah. I'm going to start with Zephaniah 1. We're not going to drain it, we're just going to cherry pick, and then look at Zephaniah 2, and then we'll take a peek at the Septuagint reference before we get into a little bit of the analysis part. So King James Version, Zephaniah. I'll start with Zephaniah 1. It's a little bit of a continuous flow, although Zephaniah 1 is just telling us that this is the day of the Lord coming, and opens it up, that's I'll consume man and beast. I will consume the fowls of heaven and the fishes of the sea, and the stumbling blocks with the wicked, and I'll cut off man off the land, saith the Lord. Actually, it's kind of interesting here. Paul Begley probably want to read through Zephaniah 1 with his dead fish, dead cows, dead whatever. It's a repeated theme in here. And he talks about, I'll stretch out my hand upon Judah and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem. See, so one of the things we're going to get into is the Jewishness and the focus of Zephaniah 2 being on Israel, but there'll be a little but coming a little bit later here. The interesting thing here, and I'm going to stop right here in verse 4 or 5 and skip down a bit, but I will stretch out my hand upon Judah and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I'll cut off the remnant of Baal from his place, and the name of the cherubims with the priests. And I had to look this up. They think possibly this could be a translation problem. Cherubims means sort of a pagan priests, which was also implied with this wording here with the priests. It's a negative connotation for priests or pagan priests, and since we're talking about the inhabitants of Jerusalem and Baal, we're talking about that there's at this time, at the day of the Lord, there are pagan priests in the land of Jerusalem. Now, what's interesting is we'll notice the Baal reference here, and then here, and them that worship the host of heaven upon the housetops, and them that worship and swear by the Lord, and that swear by Melcham. And Melcham is Molech, and these references to Baal and Molech probably go back to the original Nimrod, and I've done lots of videos on this, but it's pointing us back, saying that, you know, in the day of the Lord, there's going to be obviously priests of Baal and people swearing by Molech, that worship Molech in the land of Israel. And so I guess one thing to pay attention to is the historical nature of pagan belief. And so if you want to say, well, New World Order, and then we're moving into one world religion, that one world religion stems all the way back to, you know, even Baal, and Baal points you back to Nimrod, and so does Molech, different names in the land of Canaan, and, you know, the priests of Baal were the ones that Ezekiel, Elijah had put to death at the challenge that he gave, you know, to say, will you worship God or will you worship Baal? And the priests were the ones that were put to death, 450 of them or whatever it was. And so it's interesting because if you track that through from ancient days, that priesthood of Baal ends up in Pergamum, and we see in Revelation 2 or Revelation 3 that is the seat of Satan, and historically that priesthood is thought to have moved into Rome to establish what's now, you know, the priesthood of the Roman Catholic Church. So, and don't come after me for that one. That's historical tracking that I've done. If that's upsetting somebody that's listening to this, you know, go back and see, maybe I got it wrong. But it seems like whatever is happening here in the land of Israel at the day of the Lord, we have the priests of Baal, and we have them that swear by, you know, it's Molech. So, you know, do with what you want on that one. Let's come down to like verse 15, I think. Just to get the context here, 14, let's say, the great day of the Lord is near, it is near, hasten greatly, even the voice of the day of the Lord, the mighty man shall cry bitterly. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble, distress, day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of trumpet and alarm against the fenced cities and against the high towers. So this positionally, and we'll see, I'll point you to some of these commentaries. Most of them are saying this looks like it's, pointing to the tribulation period. Now, in one commentary, they think this is pointing us toward the middle of the tribulation period, the Great Tribulation, versus a couple of the commentaries are saying it's pointing to before it. So another thing I think is very interesting before we get out of Zephaniah 1 is neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath, but the whole land shall be devoured by fire. And we see this repeated in a couple of places in the Old Testament, and we see it repeated in the New Testament, in James, I think it is. Yeah, James, I want to say, where it talks about your gold is cankered and moth-ridden or whatever, and again, it's a day of the Lord reference. So I know personally, and this is just speaking for myself, I'm expecting the pre-tribulation rapture, so I'm not doing all these preps, and I'm not trying to convert money into gold and silver and do all that. I actually think you're going to be challenged, even if you think you're a mid-trib believer or a post-trib believer. There's lots of references to gold and silver not being worth anything in the tribulation period. And so whether it's just isn't digital money so it doesn't matter, or what, but there's so many references like this that I'm just not sure people that are scrambling to dump 401ks to get gold and silver, I'm not sure for how long that's going to be a viable option. So I'm just going to put that out there. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired, and that's definitely Israel, before the decree bring forth, before the day pass as chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord anger come upon you. So now context-wise, we've got the nation of Israel, a nation not desired, and we're before the day of the Lord. Now here's the controversial one. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. Okay, and this being hid in the day of the Lord's anger, that's the thing, that's kind of the trigger thing. Now what happens right after this is important, because it talks about Gaza will be forsaken, Ashkelon, desolation, Ashdod at the noonday, Ekron will be uprooted. These are seacoast cities around Gaza, I think to the north. The land of the Canaan and the Philistines, I'll even destroy these. So, okay, the Palestinians of today, you get that. And then we get Moab down here. I think that's Ethiopian shall also be slain, and stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh desolation, dry wilderness. Okay, so that's the context sure appears to be Psalm 83 related. When you come down into some of these passages, like Moab and Ammon are listed in Psalm 83, as well as Gaza, and the Philistines are in Psalm 83. So there's some context. Now let's just take a quick look. Let's just read the very last verse 15 here in the King James. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. How is she became a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in? Everyone that passes by her shall hiss and wag his hand. Okay, so that's if you look at this is the rejoicing city. Let's go back. It looks like the rejoicing city, if you take a look at the antecedent, the prior reference, it would be Nineveh, I guess. So that's the King James version of this. Now let's go take a quick look at the Septuagint, the same verses. Okay, here we are in the Septuagint. I like to use this Net's version of the Septuagint, and I'll put the link down below. Now the verse numbers don't line up exactly. We'll get in here, we'll pick it up at verse 8. I heard the taunts of Moab and the revilings of the sons of Ammon, which were taunt to my people and made boasts against my borders. Therefore, I live, says the Lord God of Israel, Moab shall become like Sodom, and the sons of Ammon like Gomorrah, and Damascus shall be abandoned like a mound of salt, and it shall be annihilated forever, and the remnant of my people shall plunder them. So the reason why I like coming here is Moab and actually Ammon were also mentioned in the King James Version. I didn't read all the verses, but they both were in there. Now, they're making boasts against the borders, and that's definitely, what's going on today with the West Bank and what's going on in the Gaza Strip. It's all land that was, given to Israel, and yet they've got, some of the most violent and hate-filled, people coming at them from those positions, and so. And Moab and Ammon specifically, location-wise, are probably on the Jordanian side of things. But the interesting verse down here is, and Damascus shall be abandoned like a mound of salt, because that's, I think it listed Assyria and Nineveh as the antecedent that we looked at. And now we get specifically Damascus is the thing that's being abandoned like a mound of salt, which, if this all ties together, which I'm hoping that this translation is good, what we get is, this, the meek and humble of the earth might be sheltered or hidden, it said in the King James Version, on the day of the Lord's wrath. And then Psalm 83 references, and then here we get Damascus will be abandoned like a mound of salt. Now that ties back to that news article we looked at today. Now, the U.S., Israel, whoever is getting together, there's lots of talk about there'll be several days of launching missiles into Syria to try and destroy probably their defenses, but also some of these chemical stores or whatever. It will be the context of why this would happen. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the Psalm 83 war starts when the missiles are launched, but the Psalm 83 war would include, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, all the Psalm 83, the 10 populations that surround Israel. And so, things will have to escalate from the first volley of rockets before you get the Psalm 83 war. And the first volley of rockets probably won't be destroying Damascus. It'll probably be targeted at specific installations. But you can see very clearly how that provocation of launching missiles into Syria by these Western powers could be, very well could be the tipping point, because Bashar al-Assad already said he's going to strike back and strike at Israel, which may solidify then all the Muslim nations to come and try and join in on the attack against Israel. And if we have it right, the destruction of Damascus, or Isaiah 17, which everybody's watching for with these threats against Damascus, looks like it falls in right behind or right during the Psalm 83 war. So there's all the biblical text. Now let me just show you some of the different commentaries and things without going into them, and give you different versions or ways of viewing this. Okay, so the first guy I go to here, this is Bill Salus, which I've referenced him a bunch. He's the Bible scholar that's sort of popularized Psalm 83, several books on it. He's a really well rehearsed, well researched person on all end times kind of events. Now let's just look at, he's got a whole article on this. Zephaniah predicts a war that comes before the day of the Lord. Okay, so he's clear, and then he goes on to explain all these passages in Zephaniah, especially in Zephaniah 2 that we just talked about. So Bill Salus talking about the Zephaniah passages relating to before the day of the Lord, and he ties it into Psalm 83. Now, Grace Through Faith, that's John MacArthur's group. Somebody wrote in this question. I thought it was interesting. Our small group leader used Zephaniah 2:2-3. That's the rapture reference to show that we'll be raptured before the time of God's wrath. He says lots of people miss this because we're reading a translation from Hebrew. He said if we looked at the Greek text, we would see the same Greek word for wrath that Paul used in 1 Thessalonians 5:9, which is obviously 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 are the sort of rapture definition passages. And then the response is, I see what your group leader is saying, but that part of Zephaniah 2 was written to Judah, who is called the shameful nation in Zephaniah 2:1. The church is not a nation, and is not shameful. Zephaniah 2:3 also says that it may be you shall be hid. There is no maybe in the Lord's promise of the rapture of the church. So John MacArthur's leaning away from using that as a rapture reference because it's pointed at Israel, even though he agrees the language is identical to describing the rapture of the church that was found in 1 Thessalonians 5. So that's interesting. Now we come over, and I like using Chuck Smith. And these guys, Dr. John MacArthur, Dr. Chuck Smith. Sometimes I use their name. I should give them more respect than that. But these guys are all theologians. They're all PhDs. Bill Salus actually isn't. He's self-studied, but he garners tons of respect. There's lots of theologians that quote Bill Salus. He's not low on the totem pole by any means. So I'm not going to drain this. This is a Blue Letter Bible commentary by Chuck Smith going through Zephaniah. His take is kind of interesting because what he's saying is the hiding, he's going to reference it to Revelation 12, where the Jewish people are given wings of an eagle to go being hid in Petra for 3.5 years here, wings of an eagle to bear them into the place of hiding. Now, that makes some sense, but that's definitely not prior to the day of the Lord. And so now you get into this debate. Is Zephaniah 2 prior to the day of the Lord? And the only way you can make sense of this, that it's mid-tribulation, is one, to say it's not the rapture verse, but two, you have to say, well, the day of the Lord in context was referring to the second half, or the 3.5 years at the midpoint of the tribulation. So that's what Chuck Smith is saying. Now, I found this interesting one, Dr. David L. Cooper, and there's a profile here of Dr. David Cooper from Ariel Ministries. I'll include these links down below, but he splits the difference in a real interesting way. What he's saying is, yes, the context is speaking to the nation Israel, but he says, yes, it's prior to the day of the Lord, and he goes through detailed analysis, and what he's really saying is that, yeah, Zephaniah is speaking to his people, the Jewish people, but it's an illusion because during the church age, there's no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. And so he sees this as a clear rapture verse. He's just saying that what Zephaniah is doing is telling his people Israel to be humble and meek of the earth and basically worship the Lord, because they will be raptured you'll be hid before the day of Jehovah's anger. And so I like that because it solves a couple of problems. It defines the day of the Lord the best way, I think, in the context of Zephaniah 2, which is pre-tribulation, just like Bill Salus. It matches what Bill Salus says about the rest of the verses, which is they're probably Psalm 83 related, which just about everybody that studies it puts Psalm 83 before the tribulation period, which is exactly what Zephaniah was saying. And yet it solves Dr. John MacArthur's concern that it's being spoken of to the Jewish people. And so hopefully that triangulates everything for everybody. Personally, when I read Zephaniah 2, it says all the meek of the earth. To me, the very specific verse says all the meek of the earth that you may be hidden. To me, takes it out of its pure Jewish context, but since I don't see other people interpreting it that way, I'm just going to leave it with, sure, it's for the Jewish people, but in order to be able to solve that it's part of the Psalm 83 war that's prior to the day of the Lord, and that it's a people group being hidden, and the hidden word is identical to the rapture verses in 1 Thessalonians 5. The only way to solve all those is to say, sure, it's Zephaniah speaking to the Jewish people. He's telling them if they're believers in Lord and they're humble, that they'll be hidden in that day, and the only way that's possible is that they're Messianic Jewish believers that are going to go in the rapture. So I'd love to get your comments down below, and I think what this tells me is it's rapture then war, not war then rapture. Although I will not be surprised if the U.S. and its allies do several days worth of missiles being volleyed into Damascus before something like the Psalm 83 war happens or before the rapture happens. So I just think that timing on Rosh Hashanah is getting more interesting now as we see all these events in Syria in particular spool up. So let me know what you think. Thanks for listening.